I was wonderful last time, Lynn. Lynn Bartels from the Denver Post, formerly from the Rocky Mountain News.
You were not.
I was not. I was on fire, I tell you. Eli Stokels, Fox 31. Glad to have you back.
I feel like I just walked into like a blind date or something, or a second date, bad second date.
How many dates has it been?
Way.
It's been a long time.
96 or 7.
94 is when I was elected.
Yeah, but I didn't cover RTD then.
I made you.
No,
I made you. I made you.
This is what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Do you have to be here?
Yeah.
We got a thing going on here.
Maybe not.
All right, what a night last night. We taped this on Wednesday. Friday it airs. Let's go over some of the big election. One state issue, Prop 103. I knew it would go down. I didn't know it would go down like this.
You had to have known it was going to go down like this. I can't believe people were shocked at the margin. Go back to Ref C in 2005. You had a Republican governor. You had charismatic Andrew Romanoff. You had Bruce Benson behind it. You had a fortune, the chamber and all that. It won
$11 million behind it.
Right, 52-48. That was with the fortune sent on it. And the companion, Ref D, died. So anybody who thought this
And you're welcome, by the way.
Anybody who thought this stood a chance, I was like, I've been arguing with people who thought maybe it'll lose by 6%. I'm like, when I saw Raleigh Heath at the Obama event, he said he felt really confident. I blogged about it because I thought when he said I feel good, and I was like, I'm glad you feel good. I hope you feel good Tuesday because you're not going to feel good.
But 2/3 against. This was big. That was the story yesterday, and it's a national story. We are the only state to have a statewide tax increase on the ballot this year, or any proposal, and it got destroyed.
Yeah, and I think given the climate, Lynn's right. Can't be that surprising. You see all the anger that's out there on both sides over the economy. The last thing voters are going to do is vote to raise their own taxes. I thought Raleigh Heath made the case as best as he could, going around. They got some TV commercials. I mean, first they didn't think he'd make the ballot. He did that. Then they didn't think he'd have enough money to get on TV. He was on TV as the ballots were out. But as Lynn said, there weren't enough big players behind this. A lot of people staying on the sidelines. A lot of people like yourself bashing it. And
me, I did nothing.
But you understood, you know how little coverage, your little PR stunt with the dominoes, the domino effect of the job loss. We were talking about how little coverage you got on that. Well, the other side of the race got just as little coverage. This didn't really play that big in this off-year election, and there wasn't enough money and powerful players behind it to make that case at a time when voters are just pissed off. And I thought
the interesting thing, too, is the number of people that I would group in the category of liberals, progressives, Dems, who were like, a lot of them said no because we need the bigger fix, and others said no because the economy. I mean, if this was only Republicans opposing this, I mean, there was a lot of people on the people you would consider, the tax and spend liberals who were like, yeah, it's just, I mean, the Denver Post came out against it.
Well, Denver voters came out against it. The first numbers we saw weren't statewide.
Voters in Boulder voted for it.
Well, at least there's that. But the Denver voters, we saw those numbers first last night. And I mean, Lynn's right. Most of us knew this thing wasn't going to pass. But that's all you need to see at 7 o'clock is when it's going down in Denver by 8 to 10 points. I mean, if it doesn't sell in Denver, it's not selling anywhere, maybe with the exception of Boulder. But
and it did. It passed by 52 in Boulder. Let's take a look at how it was run. In order to sell a tax increase, you're absolutely right. It is a team sport. It is an addition of people. Ref C was so hard. They had almost $12 million in hard money and probably double that in soft money, but you had a hardcore conservative, Bill Owens, along with the liberals, along with the mayor who was jumping out of airplanes, along with the Denver Chamber who loves almost all tax increases except this one. What was surprising for me was the no comment factor. Now, the governor didn't comment on this. He had no position on this. He had a position on 300, a city issue, but he doesn't run a city anymore. He runs a state. And on the state issue, he didn't say whether he liked it or not.
That was all you needed to know. I mean, hello. That was all you needed to know. He's not taking a position on it. Oh,
But why not come out and say, no, wrong answer, wrong time?
He didn't need to.
But he needed to come out on a city issue?
He wanted to. This is a former restaurant association guy, remember? He said, I mean, I don't think his position is that surprising, to be truthful.
Not to take a position?
I didn't think it was that surprising.
Here's a guy who jumped out of airplanes, rode trolley trains to pass the RTD's fast tracks, ran around with kids for pro-comp, ran around with Sesame Street characters of A through I to raise taxes here.
Which Bruce Benson chaired, by the way.
Right, but here's a guy who's never been shy about wanting more money.
Here's a guy who's pretty shrewd, though. I mean, he started a sentence in a press conference in his office last week. We're sitting around all these Capitol reporters, and he goes, well, I've never really been one to think too much about politics, or no one's ever accused me of being good at the politics. And I almost just burst out laughing, because he's incredibly shrewd politically, and I think everyone who follows him knows that. John Hickenlooper's brand is a centrist brand. He knows this isn't going to pass, but by coming out and saying no, he's alienating a lot of that Democratic base, and he's still a governor who has a D after his name. He's talked about as a possible 2016 presidential candidate with a D after his name. So he's only going to go so far. He annoyed a lot of Democrats by not supporting the thing. A lot of people said, come on, we need you to support this. And there were calls for him to do that, just as there were calls from conservatives saying, take a stronger position against it. At the end of the day, he played it probably as deftly as he could have played it.
How much money was spent to make this happen? It was the School Board Association that really helped get it on the ballot with Raleigh Heath, and then about
I'm not certain
$600,000.
Raleigh put in $10,000 of his own money.
Yeah, but that's nothing.
And there were
it takes $300 to get it on there.
There's some school board money. There were a couple nonprofits that may have private funding.
Wasn't there some school teachers things that didn't even join it, though? That's another huge clue, that not all the education groups jumped on it right away.
What was interesting was the truly grassroots effort against it. At the Independence Institute, we put out a couple of reports. We tried to dramatize it with the dominoes, which only got some coverage on Fox 31. Thank you.
There's my high five.
Yeah, $20 later, I promise.
I'll give you my high five after the show.
Yeah, give me a high one.
Yeah.
But we had former state representative Penn Fiftner with a grassroots group who were taxing for Colorado. You had Victor Mitchell, who former state representative, who I think wants to run for office again, and he put in 10 grand. But other than that, there really wasn't a huge opposition.
But it's so, when you say there wasn't a huge opposition, there was really hardly any huge opposition to referendum A. Do you remember the water thing? And it failed in every county in a year of a drought, because it takes so much more to pass something than to defeat something. And that's why once you saw the governor wasn't coming out, not all the education things were jumping on it. I mean, you have to give Raleigh credit. He felt it was important. He still went ahead and did it. He's a true believer, and I think that's awesome for him. But I think anybody who watches politics could see where this was headed.
Any last thoughts on it? Does this affect what I'm sure Hickenlooper and others are working on for the next year or the year after, the big fix, which would
what it affects are things like fast tracks, because they have been talking about going to the ballot, remember, to finish certain lines. And you can't tell me these people who weren't thinking of the ballot in 2012 aren't looking at this and going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. Because how many tax things even passed,
And that was the worry about putting it forward, is that if this loses, and loses big as it did, makes it a lot harder to go out and ask the voters for tax increases in 2012 and beyond for a couple of years anyway.
What about this argument that there are some liberals who said, the problem was it wasn't big enough. It was only 5 years. It was only an 8% income tax increase. Really what we need to do is bring back Colorado's progressive tax system that we got rid of back in the 80s and poke a hole in Tabor, get rid of it, and maybe do something with 23. So that's why it failed, because we didn't ask for enough.
I don't think so. I think you're getting far too deep. I think this failed. I mean, this didn't get a whole lot of media coverage. This didn't really, people didn't spend a lot of time thinking about this. This was clearly a group decision for the most part on behalf of all voters across the state, Democrats and Republicans, who said, aside from those firebrand liberals who believe in this like Raleigh Heath, this was a group decision, people just saying, tax increase right now, you're crazy, no way. And if you think it got into deeper issues like that, I don't think that's the case.
And I've talked to people who said, I'm far more worried about the impact on the Gallagher Amendment. I mean, fix that. I mean, so you have a whole host of things.
Let's take it to the city. Now, the governor didn't want to touch the issue that had to do with his budget, but he wanted to take a stand on the Sick Leave and Safe Leave Act, which got soundly trounced. What were the final numbers? I forget.
It's about 2-1 also.
2-1.
2-1, 64 to, I mean, it was a whooping, just like the
And that was the one people were actually more worried about could possibly
Well, and that's
pass.
just Denver. It's a progressive thing on its face. You boil it down, make it simple. Paid sick days sounds pretty good. So yeah, there was maybe more surprise at that margin than clearly there was over the Prop 103.
Even the Denver Chamber, who they usually come out for tax increases. They stayed away from 103, 300. They said this is going to be bad.
I don't think it's any surprise that the chamber would come out strongly about this. This is something that they would love to jump on. And you have to remember, I mean, Hickenlooper's a former restaurateur. Everybody kept writing, the restaurant workers are for it. Well, not all of them, a lot of them. My niece works at a restaurant and was thrilled because she was afraid if it passed, she could be laid off. She was one of the last hired. So I think people, and I think they kind of thought it was more of this, I think there's a point where people just get sick of all the mandates. You know, there's been a backlash.
Is that you saying that? Did I hear that from you?
Hey, you're talking about, Miss Conservative here, remember?
Yeah.
You forget that.
I forgot that. All right, so was this also a victory for Hancock? This was his first election out of the box. He was starting the commercial with the red tape. I don't think it really explained what the issue was. Good for the mayor?
Yeah, big time victory for him because he got deeply involved in this one. He was the face of it. He was the face of that TV commercial. And he got deeply involved in the school board races, which for the most part went how he wanted them to go. So he went 2 for 2 last night. And, what's different between him and Hickenlooper, he's trying to establish the same brand, be very business friendly. But, Hickenlooper's a little more cautious before he wades. Hickenlooper's never sort of set foot into the very sticky debate over education. Hancock's in there, and he feels strongly about these things. And he's very early, he's putting political capital on the line.
Talk to me a little bit about the Denver school board race.
I love it. The Denver school board race was the most politicized, crazy fight that you never heard of, and it was really quiet.
Because it was interfamily.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so
mean?
Interesting. These are Democrats fighting Democrats, and they're at each other's throats the entire time because this
And
whole
still, with the race over,
this
follow
debate
Twitter,
over
the
ed
wars.
reform versus more traditional union supported education policy.
And who won?
The ed reformers. And Denver's the one place, Denver's the frontier, for this national debate over education, ed reform versus the old school union hardliners. And this is the one place, or one of the very few places in the country where the ed reformers hold all the cards. They've got a mayor supporting them. They've got a newspaper, one newspaper in town with a powerful ed board that strongly supports this issue. And even the governor was sort of tiptoeing into this at the end, saying, oh, yeah, I'm with these guys. Everybody wants to be on this winning team. The DPS agenda is very powerful. And the people who challenged that found out that even with some money from the unions, they're really up against it. And they weren't able to make much headway with the exception of Arturo Jimenez, who's a Hispanic guy running in a Hispanic part of town, who's clinging to his seat and looks like he's going to win by 100 votes. And that's an afterthought because the reform candidates held the majority on the board. So that's a really fascinating race.
The school board races around Denver were all very interesting. Douglas County, the first school district in the nation to implement vouchers on the local level, bubbling up, not mandated down,
Right.
They were vindicated. They were all given back their seats with room to spare.
I'm actually not surprised, though, that
Why
they
is
were
that?
given back, because I think the county is very, very Republican. In 2002, they couldn't even get a Democrat to run for a county seat. I think the board, there was no movement of recall. There was no threats of this when this was happening. The roadblocks have come in their way have come through the courts, not through the people of Douglas County. I mean, when people get emailing me and saying, how come you're not commenting on this race? I'm like, because I think we already know what's going to happen in this race. In Denver, I think we knew it was going to happen except in Northwest Denver. Mm-hmm. And then in Jeffco, I think the margin.
Talk to me about Jeffco, because that one was a surprise as well.
Fascinating.
Tell me.
And
lay the story.
Well, in Jefferson County, you had 2 women who actually had announced months ago they were running and had been going to all these events and it's nonpartisan, but they were both Democrats. At the last possible minute.
Including Miss Dahlkemper, who's Mike Feely's wife.
Right, and Jill Feldman, a retired teacher. At the last minute, 2 Republicans who joined the race, or 2 male candidates, the dads as they called them, but the Republican Party makes a huge push for them, holds a fundraiser, the county Republican Party. And some of the Republicans who were backing the Democrats were upset by that, felt, why doesn't this county put its resources to finally winning a legislative race? And I am telling you, it was not close in Jefferson County. The moms won. They became the moms. The Democrats won. But the Democrats were worried. They were surprised at the margin of victory, and that would have been huge.
And the reason why is when you looked at the early voting, it was obvious that Republicans were voting more than Democrats in the mail-in ballots. You can track those as they come in.
But that's always true.
Giving a sense that Republicans had a good lead in that. And it turned out, did the Republican Party not give out the message that the dads are the Republicans?
Oh, no, that was everywhere. In fact, it was
The
vote for
RNC
the
gave out
dads.
the message, right?
Vote for the dads or the Republicans. That's what happened. I think the problem is they joined the race so late. There was an instant push to make this R versus D, which I think could have been a mistake, because what happened was the moms had already lined up Republican support. They had been, when you talk about education reform, Leslie Dahlkemper is the one who said, we talk circles around them in education reform because we've been going to things, we've been discussing this. They didn't even know what they were discussing.
But the Jeffco schools have been a wonderful little pit of tension. The school board meetings have been wild. The people who go there. Will this put an end to the acrimony in Jeffco? We now know.
No, thank God.
Well, no,
Thank God.
Nothing's going to put an end to the acrimony you see around school board politics, and I think that's what, for me anyway, that's a good part of my interest in education policy, school board politics, because it's so interesting. We saw it at the Capitol a couple years ago around the 191 debate. Democrats fighting
By the
other
way, 191
Democrats.
was
teacher
a school-
tenure. Teacher tenure. Some Democrats, former teachers, just couldn't get their heads around it. They're crying on the floor, and it's Republicans supporting this, saying that teachers need to be held more accountable. This is a law
That allows
that still hasn't been
a bad
implemented.
teacher doesn't get tenure if the performance isn't
ties
great.
tenure more closely to
It's a small
whether
step.
students are improving. Well, and it was just riveting to watch this debate play out and see the division, the fissures between, Democrats in the House caucus and a little bit in the Senate. But you just start to realize, education is something that people feel so strongly about. And so, this debate, whether it's D versus R or D versus D, it's a debate that's not going away, and it's really interesting to watch. I think it merits more coverage than we've had.
Seeing what happened in Denver, DPS, Jeffco, and Douglas County schools, also up in Weld County, some of the reformers seem to stay there. Was there an overall theme in education, or was it all just local politics?
Well, you could say Jeffco didn't back the so-called. I think I would go with local politics, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think, in Denver, people trust a lot of the people who are behind the ed reform thing. These are people like Mayor Hancock. These are people like Governor Hickenlooper, Senator Bennett. the power structure,
when you
the
say
Denver Post editorial board, most of the
Senator
strongest
Mike
voices.
Johnston,
Yeah,
one of the
most of the
most
strongest voices are on that side. In Jefferson
By the way,
County, it's a different thing.
When you
in Douglas
say
County,
ed reform, it's a little different than when I say ed reform. When you say ed reform, that's inside the public school system, whereas in Douglas County, people more like me say, well, that's good, that's great, but let's also let people take their money and go outside the system.
Yeah,
And those are
that's
two
a
different
really
reform
good
camps.
point. It's how you look at it. What's really ed reform? Like Leslie Dahlkemper and Jeffco said, the Democrats, we were the ones talking ed reform. So it's all, of course, I thought their whole argument was undercut because about 9 o'clock at night, there came out an email from the Jefferson County Teachers Union hailing their election. And I'm like, didn't somebody tell them, don't put out an email? Don't feed into the theory that these are the union-backed candidates.
They were union-backed. When you looked at their contributions, they got a lot of money from unions. Leslie Dahlkemper got $2,000 from the superintendent's brother. So there was a lot of money that was.
These candidates hate being defined as pro-union, pro-reform, and the dichotomy is not quite that stark, but the way it's going, you can look at these races, and there are clear lines between people who are on one side or the other, and you see that's one commonality, I think, across the different school board elections.
And then the other thing, I don't see how you're going to ever beat Leslie Dahlkemper when her campaign co-chairwoman was Senator Norma Anderson, who wrote the School Finance Act for years and years and years, is a Republican in Lakewood. I know some people, it's controversial that she went for Leslie, but she said she didn't endorse her, so she sat down and got her opinions on teacher tenure, her vouchers, everything. So once you have Norma in your corner, I think it's a pretty tough road.
Now, I live up in Boulder, and we take on the big issues, the important issues, not this taxation or education. Overwhelmingly up in Boulder, 73% of us voted that the federal government should pass an amendment ending corporate personhood. Where was that story?
where were any of these stories? I mean, you know how much news coverage we did last night of this election? I did 2 minutes at 9:30, buried after 30 minutes of snow coverage. Another 2 minutes. I mean, sorry, but I mean, you convince, I got to convince my news producers that this matters. And you look at the turnout, and you look, it's just sorry.
But you also look in this day and age, editors have a way of measuring that.
Yeah.
I mean, you go online, you see which stories get clicked, and the Cougar kitty incident, gets 750 views in one day, and the story about Proposition 1 gets 34.
There was an actual cougar, not Lynn Bartels hitting on some 23-year-olds.
Yeah, I don't think I'm a cougar. No one's ever called me that. Maybe a cougar with mange or something like that.
All right, the other big one. So Boulder loves symbolic little elections. We also voted years ago to have a nuclear weapons freeze
Well, yeah, they
in Boulder.
elected you to the RTD board.
Yeah.
How symbolic is that?
That's pretty cool. I had a great strategy. I ran against a convicted felon. I will do that again when I run again. So they also passed narrowly the municipal takeover of the electrical system in Boulder. So the same guys who outlawed pet ownership in lieu of pet guardianship now will be taking care of my power. I can't tell you how quickly I'll be buying a portable generator. This was another big issue, the first municipality in, I believe, Colorado history that has gone and taken control of an electric utility instead of getting rid of one. Big? Small?
I
Nothing?
never followed a thing on it.
Never
I didn't
followed.
follow it
be
either. I
honest.
won't pretend to know a lot about it, but I think it is a big deal. I mean, the New York Times covered this story. Last night I saw on Twitter, where else, somebody wrote, after the results came in, they wrote, "Suck it, XL." Can I say that on
You can
You're
say
sure
it.
I said it. There's this level of anger at corporations, and you can't be surprised to see that in Boulder.
It's a great company. That's
But
what's
that's
so
not
crazy.
really the point. Is in Boulder, Colorado, I don't think it's surprising to see people not making distinctions between which company meets the needs of its clients and which company is just some giant
Yeah, well, let 'em
energy
have
behemoth,
electricity from
and we can do
somewhere
it better.
else.
We can make it greener. I mean, in Boulder, Colorado, I don't think it's shocking that it passed, and I think because the margins were so slim, that's a community that definitely was split on this and spent some time looking at it. It's not everybody in Boulder. It's not 70-something% who voted to pass this.
But 70% wanted to end corporate personhood. Yes,
Nothing
that's
wrong
good.
with that.
So talk to me a little bit about the coverage of this, because on radio last night I was able, thanks to the websites, I'm looking at People's Press Collective, I'm looking at the Denver Post, I'm looking at Colorado Polls, which said nothing because it was a bad night for liberals, but I didn't garner a lot from the news coverage on television, and even the papers weren't as active, particularly in 103, which I thought was the defining election. I mean, it's getting coverage nationwide. It's a barometer for how the nation feels, but here locally, it was a little hard to find mainstream coverage. Care to weigh in?
I think, in TV, snow trumps everything. It was snowing
Why is that?
last
I'm
night.
always curious about that.
I don't know. It's like what's happening right now, and for whatever reason, there's a fascination with seeing the reporter standing out in the foot of snow talking about it, which is why I cover politics, so I don't have to do that.
But I mean, it's
among other
a
reasons.
constant. It's as if you could get the canned footage of that and run it every
We can
couple
see
weeks.
every
Yeah.
reporter in a newsroom covering snow standing in a different part of town. It's the same thing, and we'll do that all night long. We'll do it every time it snows. I think
itself.
this election was a low turnout election. It didn't, even the tax issue didn't really galvanize the entire state, at least not in terms of media coverage, at least not in terms of money coming in. It wasn't a big thing. And I think blogs are great. I think whether they have a point of view, whether the news blogs or whatever, I think you'll see more coverage there. But the mainstream media, so to speak, the objective, fair and balanced media, whatever your wink and nod phrase for that is, there's only so much time, and I think business models are such that, unless this is like presidential politics or something huge and sexy, you're not going to see it. There weren't any huge, sexy things last night. I had to convince my bosses that if 103 passed, if hell froze over and that passed, or if in Denver, what seemed more likely, the paid sick leave measure passed, both of those would have been national stories, and we might need to play that a little higher than, say, 9:30 in a 9 o'clock newscast. Didn't happen, but it's hard convincing these folks that this stuff really matters when voters don't seem.
The
all
chances
that.
of you getting laid off have just doubled. You know that.
But
don't worry,
this
your bosses probably don't watch
this
this show.
is kind of what's going on with political coverage. We give tons of coverage to an Obama visit. I mean, I was actually irked that he came back for the second time that close because I felt there was local races we hadn't covered. And to cover a presidential event, the time you have to be there so early, and the security, you just tie people up for a speech. And meanwhile, I mean, I'm like, let's go look at this race or look at that race. I think it's the way of the world. But like I said, I mean,
A speech we heard a month ago. And Lynn's exactly right. Last week, Tuesday and Wednesday, he's here. And so that's 2 days that week, a week before an election, where you can't come to a No on 103 press conference. You can't do things like that and highlight local issues that are way more important, I think, to voters.
Well, then where do people go for this stuff? Because I used to go to you guys. I mean, thank God for the spot blog that the Denver Post does. I think it's one of the, there is, for us junkies, we get news from there. But when it comes to ink.
well, let me tell you, I thought the biggest shock out of the election was Denver had kind of a nothing burger on the ballot. Hey, we discovered that we don't have anybody authorized. If the auditor's not available to sign something, we need to just authorize somebody to sign things. It was a nothing burger. It was one of those routine cleaning up 1870 laws, right? It barely passed. I mean, I was like, this kind of shows that you need to educate people, because people thought, oh, they're adding more people to government. Or my sister called me at 6:39 and said, what is this on the ballot? I'm like, where are you? Because it's like 6:39 p.m.
Well, where are the papers? All right, less than a minute left. Give me the big winners and losers from the election.
I think anti-tax folks like you. I think Mayor Michael Hancock's a winner in Denver. I think ed reform in Denver, those are big winners. And people who hate marijuana in Fort Collins, I think they're going to ban those pot shops up there.
It didn't pass in Steamboat Springs, so if you need to get high, apparently Steamboat Springs is a place to do it.
I think I'll do different ones than he did. I think Norma Anderson was a winner with the results in the Jeffco school board race. I thought Laura Bogg was a loser because she was backing the two candidates. She's a current controversial school board member. I thought Ryan Fraser was a loser. I mean, he's now run 2 elections back to back. There's a lot of talk that 2 conservatives on the ballot split the vote.
Because that's what we Republicans do best. Lynn, thank you. Eli, thank you. Enjoy your new job, whatever that's going to be. And thank you. We'll see you next week.